Welcome back, listeners to Learning from Friends. My name is Cade, your tour guide in this lovely adventure that we get to do bi-weekly together. And I'm excited today that I get to sit down with Janice, Curtis, and it's going to be a blast. We're going to be talking about genealogy. And that is something that we all deal with every single day of who we are as people, who we are as individuals. Where do we come from? What is the whole entire lineage of how you became the person you are today? But before we do that, we got to have my mom's quote of the day. So, Mom, take it away.
Never look down on anybody unless you are helping him up. Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Thank you, Mom, for setting the tone here to our episode, just because it's one of those things that throughout history and throughout the stuff, the people that impact our lives, we have to have those nice little people there that do that. And my mother and my father and my family have always been very impactful to me and very important. So say thank you and you're welcome and all the other different stuff to your loved ones and people around you, and try to make sure that you kind of make that connections there. So before we can kind of do that, I got to introduce our guest. Janice, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
It's so good to have you come on here, and I'm glad that we were able to meet during the summer, during my time that I'm off from school, to be able to actually sit back and enjoy and have a good conversation, because we've been conversing for the last 2 or 3 hours before sitting down and actually getting to do this.
Yep. Going over all my research and my love for genealogy. Yeah.
And that's a blast. And I've been enjoying getting to learn a lot about that just by, I haven't really dug into Ancestry.com before that much. I've seen the free versions, but I never got to see the really big versions that you have actually gone through in tremendous amount. So before we kind of can get into things, tell us a little about who's Janice.
Well, you'll be able to tell from my accent that I was born and raised in Georgia. I'm a Georgia girl. My family, my mom's side and my dad's side, Georgia. So I'm pretty much grounded in the state. Also, I'm a retired teacher. This will be going on my 3rd year that I've been retired. So I've been able to spend a lot more time on my genealogy than I ever had before. And I love it. I love researching and finding out the mysteries of my past, and hoping that my children and my grandchildren one day and future generations will enjoy what I'm learning myself and finding out.
And being able to now start to compile things a little bit as well is really cool, because being able to compile things, that's always the hardest part, is how are you going to format it? You were discussing trying to make it into a book that someone wants to actually pick up and actually spend time with, and that is extremely challenging within itself to do so. Now, how do we know each other, Janice?
Your dad and my husband are first cousins, so that would make us, I think, second cousins through marriage.
Yeah, second cousins through marriage.
Yes. And I've been in the family for, Lamar and I've been married, 40, going on 43 years, I think, in August. So 43
Congratulations.
years. I remember when you were born.
Yes, and 35 years ago.
Yep.
So there's a lot of, we've discussed for the 3 hours before we kind of got started here, there's some jargon, there's some verbs, there's some things that we use. Is there any types of terms that you want to kind of go ahead and say that maybe make it a little easier, because you're going to use it multiple times, like Ancestry.com, like what is Ancestry.com? What is those little things like that?
Well, and a lot of people are not familiar with Ancestry.com, and it's a program that you can use that's a database. You can actually put a tree together, what we call a format of it. Like back in the old days, they would have like the paper copy. Yeah. Now it's on Ancestry. You have Ancestry.com, and you can actually see the links of your family together. So that's Ancestry. We talked about Find a Grave.
Yeah.
Ancestry, you have to pay for that format, of course, and I think it's well worth it, because I think I'm now paying $25 a month, where if I had to, like in the old days, doing the genealogy, I would have to travel to all these states and places and do all this on foot.
Yeah, we're talking the Jones book, where they had spent, the whole entire, she said, a small fortune.
And so Ancestry.com is just right there. I can get census records. I can get so much information that I've rarely had to go out and find anything other than if I want to go visit places. If I find out that I have an ancestor who's from, I don't know, somewhere in Virginia, that I can go and check that out. Check out cemeteries. Another one is Find a Grave, which you said you've.
Yeah, that's the one. That's a free one that's available. Yep.
Mhm.
I like Find a Grave.
Find a Grave is free. It's made up of volunteers. I've actually volunteered for a local cemetery here because I have so many family buried there. When you volunteer, you basically get, if anyone wants, like I had one lady who contacted me and she wanted a photograph of a grave. And then there wasn't a photograph on Find a Grave. So I went over and took the picture and uploaded it and made sure that she got it so she could email me. So it's made up of volunteers, but it's a free service, and it is, if you can't afford Ancestry, if you've got a budget and you can't afford that $25 a month, Find a Grave is the way to go. It's free. Usually the families are already linked on there, so you can like click and find out siblings and children and where they're from, buried, locations of where they may be buried or possibly.
And that can just open up doors within itself, just to be able to know where the community is. And
it really can.
And then, yeah, your libraries, being able to kind of get into your libraries.
And I have seen people literally add on Find a Grave, add documents.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I have seen documents added on Find a Grave.
And then within Ancestry.com, all of those, the nice, the censuses are available, all those different stuff that is available to kind of connect in. Is there any other websites or any other groups that you like to use, or any other words that maybe that we'll discuss?
Pretty much I use those two sources as far as words. Census. A lot of people are
they don't know what
not
the word census is. That's
familiar
true.
with census records. They're not familiar with that. And I think we're in a time now where you get I think you get those through the mail sometimes.
Yeah, we get them, it's the mail.
And a lot of people disregard that, but they are so disregarded, but they're so important.
So what is the census itself? What's all entails?
Well, past census, I can't really speak much for what they ask now. I think it's more detailed, but in the past census, you would have the head of the household.
Okay.
You would have the spouse, you would have the children, and you would have like a rough age of and a year of when they were born. We're talking 1850s, 1880s. So you would have an idea of the year they were born. You're not going to have an official birth date. An occupation, whether they're farmers, you would actually have if they own or rent. They would rent their homes. And they would have like the father may have been born in Georgia, the head of the house born in Georgia, and the spouse could have been born somewhere else, South Georgia or not South Georgia, but South
So it gives them
Carolina.
where they're originally located
Yeah,
from.
and that's pretty much from 1850 on. Now, if you go before 1850, you're just going to get a head of the household name, and you're going to get a number of, and it would be how many white people are in your home, and you may have 4 or 5, and it would have people of color. And so if there were people of color, you pretty much knew that it was a slave
home.
Slave home. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And then how has the census maybe like evolved after 1850s? When did it start getting a little bit more detailed?
I'm not really sure, but I believe it's gotten a lot more detailed in your home.
Now it definitely has. Oh my gosh, it's a lot.
Possibly even your income. So it's a lot. And I think that's why people kind of stand off from it, because it's like, that's too much. We don't want to give out all this information. It's not as simple as it once was. And I know at one time they hired people to go around and do the surveys in homes. And that's been like in my lifetime. I
remember them coming through in free home and coming in and gathering information.
And they would pay you so much to go in and do the census. But I think now it's either through the mail or
there's 2 forms. You can do it online or do it on the form.
It's every 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's not like every year. It's every 10 years.
And that was challenging this time around with the 2020 coming through with COVID.
Yeah. And the problem with some census records is you had a lot of these documents were in courthouses. You had a lot of official documents in courthouses. And back in the day, they would, you'd have a lot of courthouses burning.
Yes, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. There's a whole nother story behind some of those. And they were lost. And they come out. Let's see, they just came out with the 1950. They've made 1950 census available.
Is it because of the copyright years that they or something like that on it?
I
wonder why they always do that.
I think they do that.
It's like 70 years.
So many years that they can do that. And it could just be the length of time and families. I don't want to give out too much information, people who could possibly still be
True, still be
living,
alive
yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, so 1950, I don't know why, because it's going to be available anyway, but 1950 was really awesome because I was able to find the census for my mother as a young girl living in the Macedonia community with her
Hey.
parents.
Yeah.
And I had not found that before. So there's the 1950 was really cool.
Well, that's neat.
Mhm.
Now, as you do your research and you're gathering up all this information and everything, have you run into any misconceptions or stereotypes that people would have on genealogy?
Well, I think probably the greatest misconception is DNA testing.
Mm.
The DNA testing is big. And I haven't really met anyone as much as I have been reading about it online and on my research. Some people are they're afraid of DNA testing because of crime solving. And they're afraid that if they do a DNA test and their DNA's out there, they could be linked to a crime, a murder. And that's just not the case at all. There's a show called Bloodline Detectives with Nancy Grace, and that's what the show's about. They solve cold cases using today's DNA. They take the DNA from like 1920 and we're talking 40, 50, 60 years ago. And if they have DNA from that time and that crime scene, they'll take that. And what they do is they use genealogy, and they literally use these. There's companies that they can work with that will put together a whole ancestral tree using that DNA, and never in those have they ever linked to someone whose DNA showed up at a crime scene that wasn't actually 100% that person.
Interesting.
And they use like I could possibly just take me for example. I've used, my DNA's out there. They could come to me and say, we're trying to solve a crime from 30 years ago, and we have linked that person's DNA to you, and we believe they're either could be a first cousin, second cousin, and they might ask me for more DNA.
Yeah.
And you can, of course,
you can choose to deny or not.
or whatever.
Yeah, not required.
But they're not coming to me and saying, "Oh my gosh, you've got to be the person." It doesn't work like that because I'm not my DNA is not a perfect match.
No.
And so they can take my DNA and use that, and they have literally went through cousins of these criminals to finally locate them. And then what they do with the suspect is they will do a whole timeline. Was that person living in that area during the time of the crime? And they will still get updated DNA from that person to see if it is definitely and it usually is a perfect match. The way they do the DNA, they're not going to go ask that person, can I have
can I swipe you?
They can legally follow that person, surveillance that person. If they throw anything away, like a cup, a cigarette butt, they throw it, toss it to the side.
They can be able to get DNA off of it.
It's legal. It's free.
Yeah.
Once they've thrown it away.
Trash. Yeah.
And they'll go get it. And they may surveillance these people for months before they finally get something. They can, in a restaurant, they can follow them if they leave something and pick it up. And then that's how they get their perfect match.
That's amazing.
So it's a process. It's not just because
you swabbed, now it's permanently there and they're going to track you down forever.
Yeah.
No.
So it's not that I'm going to be charged with a crime because my DNA just happened to be not even a perfect match, just because I'm linked in some way to this crime because of my DNA.
Interesting. Yes, that's something that I definitely hear a lot.
And it's really sad.
It stops a lot of progress.
Yes, it really does. That they're misinformed, or they just assume, oh, my DNA is going to link me to a crime, because you hear about this crime was solved on the news, but from DNA. So I think that people get that idea that, oh my gosh, my DNA could be linked, and that's not how it works. So if you're not sure if you've considered doing your DNA testing and you're worried about that, just watch Nancy Grace, Bloodline Detectives.
They'll let you know.
It's really cool because it's an extensive, and they have actually, in one case that I was watching, they actually had a law enforcement team put the tree together, the family tree together. which is very time consuming.
I can believe that could take,
Yeah.
and someone dedicating that much time to be able to do it, they're gonna get precisely what they need to be able to get. It may take a little while, but that's the job that they have
With
kinda
this
set in place.
DNA testing, they have, and DNA doesn't lie.
No, it doesn't. You can't alter your DNA.
And
Well, that we know of yet.
so
Who
it's
knows what
really
technology in the future will be.
changed cold cases. And it's great that it can be solved, but usually over time, a lot of times family members, the parents of the the victim they've already passed on. Sometimes the criminal has already passed away, but it gives
True.
but family say, well, at least
Closure.
we haven't
Yeah.
closure. We have an answer. We know who did this. And sometimes they've suspected that person all along. I knew that was that person. And it gives them closure. And it actually has also, there's always a person of interest, maybe a spouse that's wife was murdered in their home, and they think, oh, it was the spouse who did it.
Yeah.
That DNA, and when they finally solve it, it eliminates them as they're no longer a suspect.
That's nice.
And some of these people go like years without over their like a shadow of people, even the victim's family thinking, oh,
it was that person.
our
They did
son-in-law or our
this.
brother-in-law did this.
Yeah.
And then they're finally clear through that DNA test.
And that is nice
Hmm.
to be able to have clear your name entirely. Now, there is genealogy itself. What got you interested in it to be able to pursue this genealogy and finding out more about your ancestry?
Well, I was in the 11th grade in Forsyth County High School, which is now Forsyth Central.
Okay.
That's how old I am. I graduated in 1980, but this was about 1979. I was in 11th grade, and I had a history teacher who gave us a homework project, and it was to complete a paper genealogy outline. And so I was like, okay. And my grandmother, my dad's dad was still alive, and my grandmother, my dad's mother, her mother was still living. So I had a great grandmother who was still alive in Forsyth County. So I focused pretty much on that side of the family just because it was in school in Forsyth County and I was around them more. My mom's parents had already passed away. So I focused more. I said, well, I'm going to work on this and just do what I can with my mom's side.
Yeah.
And it just got me started. I started talking to my grandmother, my great grandmother, and I started going to cemeteries, and my cousins, I had a couple of cousins that went with me, and we actually went around to some of these cemeteries where we were learning about my great-grandparents, and from there, it was just like I was hooked.
So that's how you start now tracing everything, that process, because of you start talking to that family and start getting the information. That's pretty amazing. Like, can you walk me through that process of what it's like talking to the family member and gaining this information and then almost going on this rabbit hole?
Well, it's just talking to family, and you know how grandparents are. They love to talk about their family and their history. And I wish I had done more with especially my grandmother, my great-grandmother, maybe some audio recordings or video. Well, not video, but I could have done.
But you could have done the audio. Yeah.
I could have done the audio back in that time because we're talking 1980. And I don't even think during that time the camcorders, the big, huge,
the big ones,
gradually, and that within 10 years had been developed and were out. But
they were not easily accessible.
No, they were not. Especially if you're, my family, we didn't have all this extra money. I'm in 11th grade. I don't have money for a camcorder. So, but over time, just talking to them, and my teacher.
Hey, is this the teacher?
Yes, Rebecca Wilson. She was a social studies teacher there at the high school who got me started. And she really, I turned in my project, my paperwork, and she realized I was related to the Nieslers, which is my grandma. My grandma, Pilcher, was a Niesler. And she said, did you know that you have an ancestor on your Niesler side who is a Civil War hero?
Ooh.
And so that really, I think that was it. She said that to me, and I'm okay. So I go back to my great-grandmother. She's the Niesler. I go back to her, and I asked her, I said, is there an ancestor who was in the Civil War? And it was a brother. He was a brother to like maybe my second or third great-grandfather, maybe second great-grandfather. And she said, yes. And she had his sword.
Oh, wow.
And it was hanging in a back room in her house.
And
we
I'm
go
sure
back.
people walked by it hundreds of times and never even thought
And
about it.
so she showed that to me, and I was just in amazement that she actually had this sword. And so that just, the more I think that I learned, the more excited I got, the more information. And it's still that way today. If I get a piece of information and I'm verified and it's accurate, I'm just on fire. What's next? Let's keep going.
That's a true passion right there.
Yeah.
Whenever
And it's
you
a
know
mystery. I
something.
love mysteries. Anyway, I love reading mysteries. I love watching mysteries, learning mysteries. And so genealogy is a mystery.
And you're constantly unraveling new
Yes.
stuff. Now, whenever
Constantly a mystery.
you can't find some information from family because you feel like family knows so much. What are some of the other tools? You mentioned Ancestry.com and you mentioned to find a grave. Can you tell us a little bit about the softwares and how they can be able to like organize, analyze, and be able to form more of this web?
Well, Ancestry.com in itself, you have the format. I mean, it's there for you. It links it's almost like having that paper copy. You've probably seen the paper copy with the little links. Ancestry does that. It actually has, if you click on that family, it's got like I call it like the family link or the family tree. It's got that for you. So it's like a document within itself. Find a grave, you can link. We were talking about that. You can go on there and actually link all of your family. It's free. So it's great for someone who doesn't want to put that money into Ancestry.com, and you can link your family and it'll be there for generations. So that's one way to actually have documented documents that people can see that will always be there, hopefully. As long as Find a Grave's there, it'll be there. I use Google Docs. I've started using Google Slides. I'm a big Google person. I've started using Google Slides and starting to put some images together with my facts. And I've been working on my mom's dad's side of the family. I talked to you about the Williams family.
Oh, yeah.
I've been working on that side, and it's just been great. Another thing with Ancestry is that a lot of times you will get a link to obituaries. And I'm talking recent, like 2003, 2000, I mean, recent links. And it's through that. Facebook is great too.
I can believe that. I can believe it.
Facebook is great. It's not just for gossiping and stuff. It is actually
It has multi-purposes.
Yes, it does. It's a good purpose. So what I do is I have found obituaries of people who've passed on, and I go on Facebook because it'll list you like brothers, sisters, children, and I'll go on Facebook and start searching for them. And I have found so many people and connected to so many people.
That's phenomenal.
It's great. That on my Williams side, I was able to connect with so many of my grandfather's siblings, their kids and grandkids and stuff, that I actually have a family Facebook group.
That's set up just off of being able to make those connections.
So we can communicate, and yeah, so it's great. Learn about each other.
Well, as you're uncovering all this new information, you're finding all this stuff, how do you handle that conflicting information when you're researching? Because I know you said on Ancestry.com, whenever we were discussing earlier, that somebody has placed something up, but doesn't mean that it is 100% accurate.
You have to verify. You can't just take someone else's research and say, oh, yes, that's true, because they make mistakes. They may not, and they may actually, like myself, they may have actually linked onto it believing that could be their lineage or their family, and they're waiting to verify to make sure. So you have to like check it yourself. You have to take the information of someone else on Ancestry and see if it does fit. I mean, you don't just, whatever you find, you've got to verify it, or you could be on the wrong trail.
And have you come across moments where someone has written something that you've had to go in and correct, or that you've learned has been different than what you've discovered?
Yeah, we talked about my grandpa Williams, his mother's side of the family. I've started really working on tracing that family. And I was telling you, I found a link where George Washington is possibly a distant cousin to me. And I was just beside myself. I was jumping up and down. I was ready to tell the grandkids. I was on the clouds, you know. But then once I settled down and I started looking at what this person had, it just kind of didn't flow with me. It
didn't feel right.
It was locations, like all these children of this relative were born in Virginia, but on my line, which I was pretty sure I had verified was my person, was born in Maryland. So that made me think, I don't know.
A little bit of a red flag.
So I'm
Yeah.
still going to research more about that, but I'm just not sure. And
Yeah.
through that family, there's a very good chance I could be related to George Washington, but it's not going to be a cousin. I'm not sure that it'll be a cousin, but I'm going to have to look at more documents. And this family that I'm possibly linked to with George Washington was a very, very prominent family and kept records. So there's records there I know, and so I'll be able to find the truth one way or the other.
Yeah, and you've been lucky, you said, on some side of the families that you've been able to that have really great records, like you had mentioned. That's, oh wow, they can be able to do this. And sometimes there's mysteries, and you have found some really neat mysteries over in discoveries through your researching. What has been some of those nice little discoveries that you found?
Well, one of them I'm going to say was my grandfather, my Grandpa Williams. His dad was a great mystery because there was no information on him whatsoever. I had nothing like his father, grandfather. And so there was some stories in the family that he was orphaned. And I had told you that I had sat down with one of my mom's sisters, her older sister, and she had actually given me some names. And so I knew there were parents that I had the names of parents, but then they got misplaced through different reasons. They got misplaced. And as I was doing some research, I looked at both. I looked at, was he really an orphan? I looked at any kind of census, census records. I looked at the census records to see if I could find him. And I finally found a family in Murray County that had a Thomas Wesley Williams, born the same year. Because remember, the census, they don't give the whole birth date. They give the birth years, possibly, 1858 or whatever. So I said, oh, this is promising. And then I looked at the possible mother of my great-grandfather. And I told you that last name really stuck out because of my conversation with my aunt. And now through DNA testing, here the last, I think, 3 years through DNA testing, I now have a DNA link with that family.
And that was amazing to be able to find that, answering that question.
I have the great mystery, and I'm going beyond to I think an 8th great-grandfather who was in Virginia that I'm going to actually go take a fun genealogy
there we go.
trip and see if I can find out more about that ancestor instead of having to go and just go start from scratch. And I've got, facts and all the information I need, but I just want to learn more about that area and what he was able to accomplish during that time. Now, that was the mystery. The really, really cool fact I learned, and this was on my dad's side of the family.
Okay.
My dad's mom's side, the Nieslers. I talked about the Nieslers earlier.
Yes.
With the Civil War, with the sword.
With the sword and everything.
Yes. Well, on that side of the family, I realized, and this was in probably the past 10 years I discovered this, that we are related to Dale Earnhardt.
Wow.
I know.
That is fascinating.
It is awesome because I grew up in a racing family. I mean, we were Dixie Speedway. It was on Sunday afternoons. We were, even after I married, we were at my dad's watching the race. And so Dale Earnhardt, and that's accurate. It is really, I've got the facts, everything. But Dale Earnhardt is my 5th cousin once removed. Once removed is first generation.
Okay.
That's a first. Second time removed is a second generation.
Okay.
I had to study up on that. I was like, what is this once removed?
Yeah, I never understood that whenever it comes to doing those. I always struggle with that.
He is a first generation 5th cousin.
Was that so you said on which side of the family?
My dad.
Your dad's side of the family.
And this just made his day because Dale Earnhardt he idolized Dale Earnhardt. He thought Dale Earnhardt was the greatest, ever. My dad's really into racing. And so to be able to tell him, my dad passed last year. So to be able to tell him, this was like 10 years ago, you are actually related to Dale Earnhardt.
See, that's fascinating. That's awesome.
Yeah. And the only thing he could say was, I can see that. He reminds me of the Niesler family. I can see that. And it's neat because there is a distance in the relationship,
Mhm.
but I look back now, Dale Earnhardt's actions, his personality reminds me so much of the men in the Niesler family. It
So
reminds
it
me
all
so,
connected
even though
together.
he was an Earnhardt
Hard, but
too,
still, yeah.
but I could just see that. I'm like, this does not surprise me. Dale Earnhardt. And so that was really cool to find that out.
So you find these really cool, neat things that you can be able to locate here. What about if you find something that is not always, history is not the bright side of life always. Whenever you approach something sensitive, how do you approach that?
Well, I haven't other than slavery. I had family, and that's just part of history.
Mhm.
I had ancestors who owned slaves. I mean, and they became very prosperous from that. And that's just part of history, and it's what it is, unfortunately. I mean, this is just, and you just learn from that. Yeah,
Yeah, that's hard sometimes to be able to figure out
Yeah.
and navigating, and that's always a nice thing whenever looking through history is you never know what you're gonna uncover.
Yeah.
That's the nice thing.
And I
It could change
expected
history
that.
entirely.
I really expected it. I expected to have if they own land, farmland, more than likely, especially when you look back in the 1800s, you're going to expect to see that. You know, if they had large acres of land and they had cotton, you're going to have slaves. I mean, and it's sad, but it's just what it is, you know. And then probably the one thing that I found that's not a big deal today, but my grandfather had a sister who had a child out of wedlock.
Okay.
And this is how the times have changed. You know, now, I mean, that's, not a big deal. In the 1800s and even 1900s, if you were a single woman and you had a child out of wedlock, you might as well put the scarlet letter on your face.
Yeah, at that time.
And it was really sad. And so I did some research on her and I had heard from one of my mom's sisters that grandpa, her dad, had a sister who had a child out of wedlock. And I thought, and I actually found that information.
Oh, wow.
I did. She had one child. From what I can determine, she never married.
Okay.
Which is unfortunately probably because of that. She was like a scorned woman because she had this child.
Unfortunately on that.
And it's really sad. And it makes me wonder, how did her family treat her? You know, how was she treated? How did her mom, her dad? How did my grandfather treat her?
Yeah. Because that can change an entire experience.
And he was very old-fashioned, traditional. So I just wonder what that did to her. Like, how was she treated, even within her family? I often wonder that. I have found her in 3 different census records, and she was living, her son had grown up and married, and he had the Williams name for a long time.
Okay.
And then I found a record where he had finally married and started his own family, and he was a Wilson. So that tells me that he found out who his father was, because he was
To be able to
by
change
Wilson.
the name.
And she lived, in one sense, she was actually living with her son for a while. And then in another place, she was living with a brother down in South Georgia. And then the last record I have of her, I think was it 1950? She was living with a sister here over in Gordon County.
Okay.
That's the last record I have found of her. And so after that, I don't know. I don't know where she's buried. I know where her parents are buried here in Pickens County. So I'm assuming maybe she was in an unmarked grave. Her sister and that she was living with at the time, she's buried in a local church cemetery here. So they could have buried her at their church cemetery.
Sure.
But I often wonder how I think young people today don't realize, you can kind of, for the most part, live your life. You can get out here. If you choose to be, maybe you don't want to get married and you want to have children. I have a friend who's actually never married, but she decided she wanted a child. You can do that.
Yeah.
But back in
the
that
stigma
time,
that came to
the
that
stigma
was drastically
was
different.
not good.
Yeah.
And it's really sad that she, was in that situation and it just impacted her whole life.
Wow. Yeah, it's true. It's drastically how, again, times change, things change, and how we look at that.
Because I would say, even with my grandparents, like my grandma Pilcher, she lived to 2002. In that family, who you married was very important. I remember when I met Lamar and we're dating, she approved of it. She said, he comes from a good family. I know his family.
Yeah.
And Lamar's dad, his parents used to live when Lamar was really small, lived next door to my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa
cool.
Pilcher. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when she found out that I was dating him, she said, "Oh, yes, I know that family. They're a good family." And even in 1980, that was still a thing. They wanted, and my dad, he was the same way. He was very happy I was going to marry into a good family. And that was something, like I said, that was going on during that time. And you could be disgraced if you were marrying into a family they didn't approve of. Even in I don't know that I would have been disgraced, but I would have known they would not have been happy.
Yeah.
We don't like this family. We know about this family. They're not a good family. We don't want you. But I just lucked up in having to marry into a good family.
Now, as you've done your genealogy over the years, there's been a lot of rewarding stuff that you've already mentioned earlier. You've made this whole new Facebook page group. You've made connections with other families. Has there been any other types of rewarding events of just by doing genealogy for you that you want to kind of be able to mention? Or experiences that you've have brought to you as a result of looking up your family's history?
I think it's just really, when I think back and the research I've done, my grandfather, my mom's dad was a sharecropper. I think I told you that.
Yes.
And that was, I don't know that people really understand it, but that was not an easy life.
Oh, no.
I know.
It's hard.
My Aunt Edith, my mom's older sister, lived to tell me some of their story, and they had one wagon that they traveled in and just enough of what they needed in that wagon. And you can imagine they went down in South Georgia, back up here to North Georgia. It would take like months with a wagon. And so I really there's a pride. I know how hard they worked to get to where they did. My grandfather was finally able to get some land in the Macedonia community and settle there. But it took a lot of hard work and him having to work other people's farms before he could get to that.
Yeah, that's a lot of time as a sharecropper being able to get there and work that process. I mean, I can only imagine.
A lot of my ancestors from other countries, like mostly Europe, came here for, a lot of it was religious freedom. They were being persecuted where they were at. Because you got to realize in these European countries, whatever the government's religion was what you were
That's what you had to follow. You needed to be able to be in place.
And so many of them did everything they could. They were even indentured servants, which means that they found someone in America to pay their passage, and in return, you worked for them. You had a contract. You worked for them for
X
5
amount
to
of
8
years or something like that.
to pay that money back, and then you would be on your own. And I didn't really find that in my family, but I know there were cases where people were deceived.
Oh, entirely throughout history.
Maybe they couldn't read or write, and they would
contracts.
sign documents that basically
Gave up your entire life.
Your freedom to this family, and you didn't realize you were doing that, which to me is another form of slavery.
It is.
Yeah.
And throughout history that happened.
So I didn't find that in my family, but I did find where a couple of mine came over as indentured servants to get here.
Yeah, because you got to find a way, and
you got to find a way, and made it. They were eventually able to have their own land, and and some actually even became part of the government. Like I was telling you, there's one family I'm researching right now, my grandfather's mother's side of the family, that I've kind of put on the back burner because I've been trying to deal with who was my great grandfather, his dad.
Yeah.
And so I'm working on that family, and some of them came here. They started out in Virginia, and they were part of the House of Burgesses, which was our government before
we even established ourselves.
Our Constitution
was written.
So I'm really cool. I'm excited about that, and I'm wanting to go more in that area and just do some fun research and learn more about these people. So,
and that's the cool thing is you use the word fun. And that's the thing, it's a passion, it's a joy. So how do you see like genealogy contributing and preserving and passing down these legacies that like with the family of Burgess and things like that to be able to affect our future generations and affect the people kind of around us? Because this is fun, this is an enjoyable thing. Like why is genealogy like that important for that?
Well, you don't just learn about your family, you learn history.
Yes.
It's
I
not
love
just
that.
all about your family, but you do learn history that, finding out my grandfather was a sharecropper motivated me to learn more about sharecroppers and what their lives were like.
Yeah, because
And
that's a
and I
different world.
found
Yeah.
out the sharecropping originated from the end of slavery. A lot of people don't know
See, I
that.
thought I went back further, but again, I guess because of the fact that the
Well,
term and stuff started to be able
in the
to grow.
South, sharecropping, because these big plantation owners and these farmers, they needed somebody to work the crop, and then when slavery
Yeah, but they
came
got
to an
thousands of
end,
land, 1,000 acres of land. That's
then
true.
they started looking at poor white. My grandfather was a poor white farmer. He was poor, and that was the next step, is finding these poor white people. And what you did with sharecropping is they offered you a shack of a house to live in, and you worked the crop, and if that crop made money, you got to share some of that money. And so think about it. You're getting a roof over your head, but
You're hoping the crop's good this
they're
year, and
hoping
you're
the
hoping
crop's
that you're making
good.
a gamble.
How are you still where's the income coming in while you're waiting on this crop? So it was a hard life.
And that's, again, you're learning history, you're learning new knowledge, you're
Mhm.
growing yourself. And you've mentioned a bunch of really good websites that are from earlier that we've used. If someone's looking to get into genealogy now, if they're looking at trying to look into this, what advice would you give somebody who's wanting to research more on their family tree? Besides, because we mentioned some of those websites, but we've also mentioned your passion, that someone gave you a project in 11th grade that completely, Miss Wilson, changed your course of history. What advice would you
That's
give
just
somebody?
amazing. If you're very passionate about it, it's gonna take years. It took me years. This is not something you can just do. Even
True.
I think now with the technology I have, I'm still working. I'm still
Yeah.
working on finding out more. And a big portion of my research, I probably had the first 10 years where I had to rely on the old way of going to the public libraries.
That's a great place to start.
They have the research centers where you can actually read. If you're writing a paper for college, you can find information there. But they also have the genealogy. So that was where I started for probably the first 10 years before I started getting the technology came around. So it takes a while. And sometimes you'll be like, you'll get kinda down about it, or it'll just be, "Okay, this is getting too much, just take a break."
Yeah.
And I
Step
did.
away. Yeah.
I did take a break. There were several years that I didn't really get to work on my genealogy. I was teaching. I'm a retired teacher now. And I was teaching, and I was involved in trying to get my working in why was I gonna teach in my classroom?
Yeah.
Oh, another thing is genealogy. I was able to bring a lot of that in my classroom. I shared
And
that
the
with my
kids love
students.
that, they eat it up.
And so, I was able to share a lot of the history I had learned through my genealogy. But it takes a while. I would think talking to family as much as you can. If you can even find out where your relatives are buried, and then
True. It's a good start.
find a grave. I have, with Find a Grave, realized that there are already people who have linked some of my family. And some of it's missing, and I can go in and fill it in as I learn. So Find a Grave is probably a great way to get started. Talking to your family, there's always somebody that knows something, and it may not be, it gets you started. Like with
Yeah.
my grandfather's dad, I heard in the family, well, his dad was orphaned, and
You
I
created
kind
a whole new story that you were able
so
to
I
find
kinda
and answer.
actually looked into that, but I kinda knew from talking to my aunt that there was some other family. If he was orphaned, he had parents.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you still have parents if you're orphaned. And so I started looking at both angles. Was he orphaned at a young age and living, adopted, or taken in with usually they would take you in, a neighbor, if you were orphaned, they would take another family would just take you in and raise you and let you live there, and you help them on their farm and stuff. So I looked at that, and I really couldn't get anywhere with that.
Mhm.
And then it wasn't, like I said, until I found that censuses are great.
Yeah, they are great to be able to give you that
And I
information.
located a Thomas Wesley Williams, born the same year that my great-grandfather was born, and then through the DNA, finally, I was able to link it.
So that's phenomenal, and
So
I
I
bet
just,
that,
I don't know.
yes.
I think you just have to have a passion for it. Once you get hooked, you're hooked. And that happened to me. That happened to me in the 11th grade, with that teacher. And I often wonder, where would I be? Would I be in this if it had not been for her?
Who
Just handing
knows?
me that sheet
Yeah.
of paper and
Just
saying,
starting the
this is
conversation.
your homework
Yeah.
assignment. I want you to complete this. And then I learned later that she was actually working on other people's family trees.
Oh, wow.
So it was a passion of hers.
And that she had passed on to her
And she
students
had
and
passed
you.
it into, she said, well, we're doing American history and all this stuff, but here's this little homework assignment I want you to do.
So your teachers, y'all, you never know how they're going to affect your life and change everything around you. Now, have you felt that your growth with your family has gotten better as a result of looking through and doing the genealogy?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I'm talking a lot about my Williams family, just because growing up on my dad's side, there was always family around. So it was never a mystery. My mom's side of the family was a little bit different. My grandfather's sharecropper, so a lot of my mom's older siblings lived somewhere else. They weren't really like in the Macedonia community or close by. I knew them, and I would get to see them maybe once a year.
Okay.
So it wasn't like this close. We get together all the time, but I knew of them. I gained a love for them through my mom, and when I would get to meet them, because
Yeah,
they were
that's
very
awesome.
close, even though they all were not. My mom married and moved to Forsyth County. She had her very oldest sister lived in Gordon County and raised her family. And so what happened is I felt this need for us all to reconnect because we'd lost parents. I'd lost my mom.
Mhm.
Pretty much all of my mom's siblings had passed away except for one or two. One finally. And I said, I'm going to have a reunion.
There you
I'm
go.
going to start doing our little Williams reunion. And I started that, oh my gosh, 15 years ago, I guess, or something. And I would try to have one every year, and we just all reconnected.
Oh,
And
wow.
now my mom's brother, Ray, his grandchildren had started coming to my reunion. I got acquainted with them, and they're pretty interested in the genealogy. So I'm excited. They're really,
Yeah, new generation.
yeah. And so it's, I think doing the family reunion helped, and so it was able for us to we knew about each other, but the only time we really saw each other much was when someone passed away.
Yeah.
And I mean, even back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, didn't really see a lot of people until someone passed away on my mom's side. And it's because they were
They have the
not in
space
that little
apart.
community
Yeah.
living together. Really good people, loved each other. Even they didn't see each other much at all the time, but when they were together, you felt the love.
You can feel, that's a
There was
big
a
special thing
love
right there.
There was a love instilled in them early on that and my mom would talk about, my brother Ray, and she would talk about them, but it was always you could see the love
Mhm.
when she would mention them. And I did, like I said, get to meet some of them as on and off as a kid, and have reconnected with my cousins.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Is there any things that we maybe haven't discussed today that you like to kind of bring up that maybe that I've overlooked?
Think so. I would just, when you had asked about, do I want to do this? Well, of course, if you're complete working on your genealogy, you want to talk about this all the time. But I'm hoping it does encourage other people.
I hope so too. I know it's going to
Yeah.
find some good ears. We've
Yeah,
got some good audience here.
because there's always a way to find the information. There's always. You may have your family may be passed away, your grandparents, but there's always a way that you can get started. Once you just get started, that information is
Yeah,
there.
that's the hardest part with anything is getting started.
Getting
And
started.
getting going. Are there any, we've given a lot of nuggets, like of little bits of knowledge here. Is there any like words of wisdom? It doesn't have to be related to genealogy that you want to leave the audience with?
Oh, yes. My favorite quote. There's always something to be thankful for. That's one of my favorite quotes. And another thing that I love that just is really, I feel strong about, you may think your life is horrible, but there is always someone who has it much worse than you. Always.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And that is true. I've found that to be true. You may feel like you're just in despair, but if you look around you and you look at other people, there's always, oh my gosh, there's always someone that has it more difficult than you do or is going through something much worse than you're going through. Always. I truly believe that.
Beautiful, solid words of wisdom right there. I love it. Now, if there's been listeners that have listened through and they're curious about maybe wanting to ask you a question or two, is there an email or something that they can be able to reach out to you on?
I actually have a genealogy. I've got, like I told you, I have like 4 emails, but the one I have for my ancestry is Janice Pilcher Curtis at Gmail.
Can you spell it out for us real quick?
Janice is ICE, Janice, Pilcher, Pilcher, Curtis, Curtis at Gmail. And that's all one big long word.
And I'll have stuff linked down in the show notes, listeners, if you like to be able to go down that way as well, to be able to locate that. Janice, thank you for spending this, letting me come over to your house and spend this morning learning more about your family, and then also sitting down today and having this nice conversation. It's meant a lot.
Well, I'm glad to have you here.
So listeners, as we kind of wrap up here and come to the end of the conversation, it's been a pleasure that you've been able to come and sit with us, and I hope you continue to come back more. There's 80 plus episodes if you want to be able to dig through and get a look at some of the different stuff. I have little categories if you want to be able to click through, maybe you find something of interest for it. But I hope you've had a good time. If you would like to reach out to me, I have a Facebook page where you can look up Learning from Friends Podcast. There's also a Twitter page, Learning from Friends Podcast, an Instagram as well that you can be able to locate. I do have a Patreon page if you would like to be able to make a donation or look through and just donate maybe some time or something as well. I'm more than welcome to be able to share some time and knowledge with you. And a best way to do that is through email, which mine is cade, CADE, at learningfromfriends.com. Thank you all for coming and listening, for your time. If you don't mind passing off information to a friend, word of mouth is the best form of communication out there when spreading something. So as we leave today, as you all know, when we come down towards the end, the catchphrase comes into play. My name is Cade Curtis, your tour guide in this lovely adventure that I like to call Learning from Friends. And most of all, don't forget to let your curiosity fly high.